Hello guys, it's Mylangs back here, and today I have a very special guest, Steve Kaufman. I'm so glad to have you here, Steve. I'm a huge fan of yours, you know that, right?
Thank you very much. That's kind of you.
Yeah, for those who might not know about you yet, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Okay, well, first of all, I've become a fan of yours because I saw your most recent video where you speak 7 languages, and you speak them, at least 4 of them or 5 of them, extremely well. I'm very impressed. So I'm a person who likes languages. Since the age of 60, which is 15 years ago, I have learned 10 languages. Not all of them, I wouldn't say I mastered them, but I've enjoyed them, I've learned them, I've discovered them, I've discovered, the country and the history and the people and stuff. And I'm able to converse in some of them quite well, others not so well. I have a channel on YouTube called lingQ Steve. Together with my son, we started a sort of a language learning platform called lingQ. And amongst the languages, and I speak, let's say I can speak a dozen languages more or less well, and another 8 or so that I struggle, but I'm learning. And those include Asian languages like Chinese, Japanese, a little bit of Korean, Romance languages like French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Slavic languages like Russian, Ukrainian, and so forth. And now I'm into the Middle East with Persian, Arabic, and a little bit of Turkish.
Wow. Wow, so I have to say once again that I'm so excited to have you on my YouTube channel and to have time to talk to you, because I had the questions that I personally wanted to know from you. Mm-hmm. And I also got the questions from my subscribers to ask you instead, okay? So I was thinking of proceeding our interview into 2 parts. The first one will be about, of course, your insights or know-how sharing about the language learning based on your own experiences, and the second part will be in Korean, which is my mother tongue, and which you already speak, and you acquired it as a foreigner, and you've never lived in Korea, so maybe it might be a good sample, to share your experiences with my viewers who are learning Korean. Is it gonna be okay?
That's fine with me.
Okay, so if I understood well, you speak 20 languages, right?
More or less. And as you'll discover with my Korean is not very good. I have sort of gone at it for periods of time. I'll go at it for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Then I'll go off to some other language, and I've never really developed it to a very good level. However, I don't mind speaking with mistakes. I don't mind, as you'll see, there's some big gaps in my Korean. It's not to show off that I speak it well. I don't. There are languages that I speak, like I have, say, a dozen languages that I speak well, I would say. Korean is not one of them. It's a language that I learned after the age of 60. But it doesn't matter. I get fun. I enjoy speaking Korean. I enjoy meeting Korean people. I'm not good enough yet where I can understand Korean movies on Netflix. But on the other hand, that's a goal I can hope to get there one day. So it's all fun. It's all fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so surprising, not only by the number of the languages you speak, but by the fact that you've learned more than 10 languages since the age of 60. Mm-hmm. So many people say that, the language learning should be done at a very young age. But what do you think about it? Do you find it harder to learn a language after a certain age? Or do you think the age matters?
I don't know, because maybe I'm learning more slowly now, but I don't think it matters. I think when you're very young, of course, there is an advantage. Your brain is more flexible. It's not, you're more open to new sounds, say. But past the age of 12 or 13, I think the brain has more or less coalesced around your main language. And so new languages at first are difficult. But as you learn more languages, the brain becomes more flexible. It hears other sounds better, it can pronounce those sounds better, it is more open to new structures. So I think it's more a matter of the more languages you learn, the better the brain becomes at accepting and learning and imitating these new patterns. Whereas I think the sort of plasticity of the neurons, the activity of the neurons, it might slow down a bit, but I don't think it's significant. And on the other hand, as we get older, we know more things, we have more experience, we have maybe a bigger vocabulary in our own language, we're interested in more things. So I think there are compensations. So I don't think it's a problem either way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah. So when I see the list of the languages you speak, they are all from different language, family or categories, because they're not all in the same basket. What is your know-how, or what is the most efficient learning method in common, applicable to all the languages you speak?
Well, first of all, you have to have a mindset that says, okay, for example, when I went to learn Chinese, now, of course, for a Canadian back in 1968, Chinese seems very exotic, right? And I even had a friend say to me, like, what if you can't learn Chinese? That thought never crossed my mind. Like, it was a given. I can learn the language. I learned French. I can learn Chinese. I can learn any language. So I think this attitude that I can do it is very important. And I know from experience that I have to get the language into me. I can't begin by speaking. I can't break down the language, this is subject, verb, object language, and learn a bunch of theory about the language. I have to get the language into me. I have to give the brain a lot of exposure to the language. And if I do that often enough and long enough and with enough repetition, then occasionally I look up some grammar explanations, but it's not my main emphasis. If I do that, there is no language I can't learn. There is no language. I can learn Mongolian, I can learn Swahili. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
Wow, good spirit. But at the same time, it's true that it takes much time to learn a totally different language. Then, was your approach a bit different for each language?
Well, obviously, if you have a language with a writing system like Chinese, where you have so many characters that you have to learn, then you have to put a lot of extra effort into that language. So the easiest language to learn is one that's similar to a language you know and has the same writing system. Because as a person who grew up speaking English, I'm most comfortable with the Latin alphabet. For you, you're most comfortable with Hangul, because that's what we've done most of our reading in. So even though Hangul is much easier than learning Chinese characters, it's always going to be more difficult for me to read Hangul than to read English. It's always going to be more difficult to read even Cyrillic, the Russian alphabet, which is not so very different from the Latin alphabet, but it's always a little more difficult. So if you have a different writing system, if you don't have common vocabulary, like there's no common vocabulary with Chinese. There's the odd foreign word in Japanese, which you can hardly recognize because they change it into a Japanese word. So those languages are going to be more difficult. But it's still the same basic approach, lots of listening and reading. And so if in 3-4 months you could be doing, understanding some things in a language close to one that you know. If you go into more difficult languages, it could be a year or more. Arabic, Persian. Again, it's a function of how much time you have every day to devote. Like when I studied Chinese, I had nothing else to do. It was my job as a government employee to learn Chinese. Within a year, I was translating newspaper articles from Chinese into English, from English into Chinese, reading novels in a year. But I was doing it 7 hours a day. So that was my full-time occupation. Now I'm happy to get an hour or two a day in, so it's taking me longer. It's a function of how much time you have to spend.
Mylangs. How do you measure your language proficiency? Because it's not, it's not a thing that we can measure with the numeric figures. The language always fluctuates, and the proficiency, sometimes, we feel that it goes up, but all of a sudden it goes down. So how do you manage your language proficiency?
So what happens is I have moments where I feel pleased with what I'm able to do. There are moments when I feel frustrated that I don't seem to be getting anywhere. And the truth is, in the first, sort of the early period where you start from nothing, and within 3 months, let's say I'm doing Persian, after 3 months I can actually understand stuff. I can even say a few things. So I'm very happy. So the early stage is a very steep climb, but there are early successes, and so you're very proud of yourself that you went from zero to something. But to go from that something to being very good in the language actually takes a long, long time. That's been my experience, because it takes a long time for the brain to get used to the language. You actually need a lot of words. Some people think, well, if I only have 1,000 words, that's 70% of most content. Yeah, but the other 30% is key. Those are the words that you really need to understand interesting things. And because word frequency declines very, very quickly, to acquire all these necessary words that don't show up that often, it just takes a long time. It takes a long, long time. And so there are moments when you say, gee, 6 months ago I didn't understand anything and now I understand, or I sense that I understand this podcast better than I used to, and sometimes you have the sense that you hear something more clearly than you used to hear it. So you understand it better. And maybe you even hear where one word ends and the new word begins. Maybe you feel that you hear it more clearly than you heard it before. And of course, that's the beginning to where eventually you'll learn that word, and so you'll be able to understand the meaning as well. So there are occasional senses of achievement, and there are lots of long periods of feeling that we're not getting anywhere. That's my experience.
So it's realistically hard to use all those languages you speak on daily basis, because you must be so busy. You've got so many positions that, and you've got lots of work at different positions. Then how do you maintain all those languages?
I basically don't. If I, for example, living in Vancouver, if I used to be invited on television, say Mandarin language television in Vancouver, so then I might spend a couple of hours listening to Mandarin. I have lots of CDs in Mandarin, or as I'm driving to the television studio, if it's 45 minutes, I'll be in the car listening to Mandarin, so I kind of try to refresh it a little bit. But I don't worry about it. If I really wanted to be good in these languages, I wouldn't learn new languages. I would spend all my time trying to improve in languages that I already speak. So, and some of them, like, I'm not going to lose my Japanese, like French. That doesn't fall off, because, I speak those so well, I'm so used to them, it's just I can fall into them anytime. Chinese is the same way, essentially. Mandarin, Chinese, Spanish, German, even Russian. Any of the languages that I speak well, that I've spoken a lot, I'm okay. I slip a bit, but I'm okay. But as you'll hear in my Korean, languages where you haven't reached that level yet, and then so you slip more, and it's more difficult. But I'm not going to try and refresh. Today I'll refresh Korean, tomorrow I'll refresh Greek, the next day I'll refresh Romanian, or I'll refresh Czech. I just can't do that. So if it turned out that I was going to be traveling to Korea or the Czech Republic or somewhere, then I would make an effort over, say, a week, and I would really bring my level up, so that then when I get to the country, then I can really take advantage of being there. But otherwise, I don't worry about it. And if I speak poorly and make a lot of mistakes, that's fine. It doesn't matter. I don't write tests. I don't write exams.
That's what I can't agree more, because whenever I get some questions, how do you maintain those languages? It's more than one or two. But after reaching the advanced level, which means that I spent quite a lot of time and efforts in reaching there. So even though I don't use those languages for a couple of years, it doesn't fall off. I can, switch on and off, So that's
absolutely. I've heard. Your English, your Chinese, your Japanese. You're not going to lose those. That's you're not going to. You cannot speak them for 3 years and it'll come right back. I don't know. Maybe in your French, if you don't spend time at it, you're going to drop back a little more. But I find that when I leave a language and I go back to it, and I'm very rusty at first, within no time I'm better than I ever was. So doesn't matter.
Mylangs. Well, I personally admire you a lot, not just by the number of the languages you speak, but by the fact that you've acquired the career success as well, because it's so important to invest a lot of time in learning languages, and to be able to speak those many languages, it's required to put a certain amount of time. But at the same time, you've acquired the career success, not just spending your whole time or whole life in learning languages. So do you think the languages were the main key in it? Because as far as I know, you are the Canadian diplomat, and you own the wood product trading company, and now you currently have the multi-language learning platform. You are at very, different positions, and you've got lots of work, and you've acquired the career success. But do you think the languages were the main key in it, and how did you manage all of them at the same time?
Well, obviously when I was a student in France for 3 years, so I spoke French all the time. I was sent by the government to learn Mandarin Chinese. That was my full-time job. And then we went in and out of China with Canadian business people, and I was using my Chinese. I lived in Japan for 9 years. So obviously I spent a lot of time listening and reading initially, but then eventually I was with Japanese people. We were talking business, and so I was using it. And then the other languages that I learned as well, I had opportunity to use them in my business. And I would say that my languages have helped my business, especially Japanese. That's the one that had the biggest impact on me, because we ended up doing a lot of business in Japan, but also traveling in Europe, in Germany, in Sweden even, they were suppliers. Germany was a market. I had opportunity to use these languages, but it was fun. Like if I go off on a trip to Sweden or Germany, I get an audiobook about some aspect of history. I like history. I might get the ebook, or I might have the actual, paper book, and I'd be reading it. And so, I can remember, when you're traveling and, with the jet lag, so I'm up at 4 a.m. and I go jogging in the cold winter day in Sweden, and I'm listening to the history of Sweden in my Swedish, audiobook and stuff. And so it kind of blended. It was my interest. I have other interests, but languages were always one of them, my interests. So yeah, it just kind of fit in. And languages bring opportunity. There's no question. You can't just, hire me because I speak languages. But when you have more languages, you have more opportunity. You meet more people, different backgrounds. You're able to make connections with people. So it's a big plus. Aside from being personally rewarding, of course.
Well, that's what I admire you the most. I also, I really want to follow your, not exactly the same career path, but
Right.
Your career along with the languages. That's what I admire you the most, and that's what I really want to make in my future.
You know what?
Oh,
You know what?
yes?
What I sense from you is a tremendous amount of energy and enthusiasm. That's the biggest factor. If you have that, you'll direct it somewhere. That energy and enthusiasm will take you somewhere. And so that's
You
a
sure?
big part of it. Oh, absolutely. That's a big part of it right there.
I really hope so. I really hope so. I really want to be like you, but who
Well,
knows? Maybe we'll see in the future. Mylangs. Then what type of language learner are you? Like some set the goals, the certain goals, and then they follow their goals. But some others just don't set the goals. They just enjoy the language learning journey. But what type of language learner
well,
are you?
you know, I always start with the goal that I would like to achieve. I don't know if you're familiar with the European framework levels, like A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. So I would like to get to B2 in all these languages, but I'm not at B2 in Korean. I would like to get there. I haven't given up the hope that I will get to B2. I don't need to be perfect in any of these languages, but B2 is where you're comfortable. You understand essentially everything that's said. You speak with mistakes, but you get your meaning across. You have the vocabulary you need. That's what I would like to get to. But things come along. So I'm doing my Korean. I can't find good medium level content. It's difficult. Let's do Russian. Or all of a sudden I get interested in the Middle East. Oh, well, let's do, and I'm at a stage, I don't have to work. I don't have to do anything. So I do whatever I feel like doing. But in all of those languages, if I had the time, I would like to be B2. That's what I would like to be.
I think you've shared your know-how and your history about the language learning, but do you have the final messages for those who are enthusiastic at language learning?
Well, if they're enthusiastic and they like language learning, or they like a particular language, that's already half the battle. Just to have that level of enthusiasm and interest is going to take you a long way. So you have to have a positive attitude. You have to believe that it's worthwhile doing, believe that you can do it, believe it in the method you're using, whatever that method may be, confident that you can learn the language. So all of those positive things are very important. And then spend the time. There's no like shortcut. It's going to take a long time, and there will be long periods of time where you think you're not getting anywhere, and you just have to keep going. And I do emphasize input, because trust your brain. You can't instruct the brain. You know, a lot of the sort of theoretical explanation of the language, things that teachers like to teach, that's not going to help you that much. You have to feed the brain enough exposure, stimulus, input, and the brain will start to form these patterns. And then occasionally you can look up grammatical explanations, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is to expose yourself to the language, initially through listening and reading, and then eventually by speaking. And then while you're speaking, you're listening to the native speaker. You're also searching for words. And so the speaking, eventually, as you progress in the language, you need to speak more and more, no question.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this interview gives so much inspiration and informative tips as well. Thank you so much.
Not at all.